Hello and welcome to the True Man podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Pasco Ashton, the founder of Men's Circle. Pasco, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. A little underslept. Our 2-year-old's a bit unwell at the minute, so it was a long night of settling her back to sleep.
Well,
But yeah, otherwise happy. Good to be here.
amazing. Well, we won't go in too hard, although that's a lie. Pascal, in your own words, what makes you a man?
Oh, so this is the only question I had to think about before, but it's not an easy one to answer. It's not a simple question. So biologically, I am male. I think that's part of what makes me a man. I have a penis. I have more testosterone than women do, and all of the other kind of bodily functions and roles that are different for a male. I studied ecology and conservation, so often I'm taking inspiration from nature and basing some relative truths in nature. I think the other thing that makes me a man are the more traditional traits that I have embodied. The common traits that men express, which I believe are directly related to our testosterone and to our male function in our ecosystem. Things like risk taking. When there's conflict or someone that needs help, I will rush towards that. This time last year, I was applying to be a firefighter, actually, and that was kind of, an example of I guess that more masculine male part of me. I think firefighters is an interesting example because they are vast majority male, and I think that reveals something about the difference between men and women. I think fundamentally the biggest thing that's shown me what it is to be a man is fatherhood. I became a father 2 and a bit years ago, and I think particularly in relation to my partner, who is a woman, I've lent in or had to step up to the more traditional masculine man father roles within our family heteronormative dynamic. I am the proactive one. If there's a mission to be done, then I'm the one who will go out and do that. If there's some sort of like social protecting to do, that kind of the one that, in modern society, instead of fighting off a saber-toothed tiger, it's having a confronting conversation with your neighbors, perhaps. That's a real example. And I think in parenthood, like the part that I embody more is a more playful part, right? There's plenty of studies around the relationship with father, and in my case, a daughter. She gets most of her serotonin with me and endorphins through play, whereas with my partner Amy, it's through cuddles, right? And I really noticed that. She doesn't want to cuddle me quite as much, but she gets a huge amount of like giggles and happiness out of play. So I guess, all of those things combined, I think, make me a man. And it's the experience I've had in relation to others. People see me as a man, and so there's this social construct that I fit within as well. People treat me as a man, and so I am a man. People see me in contrast to a woman, and there's all our layers of social constructing and how we belong in relation to others, how I belong.
I was going to ask you,
Sorry,
yeah.
go on.
No, I was going to say, I was going to ask you about how that changed through fatherhood, but you sort of answered that. But I'd be interested to know how it changed from when you got into the space. So, what are your thoughts on that question before you entered the men's space?
I guess I wasn't very clear. I think that's kind of fundamental. Like, I'm really one of my drivers to be in spaces and circles and hikes and retreats with other men. I think one of the key things that a men's circle and men's work facilitates is peer mentoring. Like, I've now sat for hundreds and hundreds of hours with men that are older than me, of different generations, and I've got to learn how to be a man through listening to other men talk about how they do it, and learning which parts of that I want to take on and which I don't. So before, I think I really was a bit more clueless. I'm a really lucky man. I have the unusual fortune of having a brilliant dad who was as present as he could be and an incredible role model. My dad and I used to go to the woods and chop wood for the fire, right? You don't get much more kind of masculine and learning how to be a man than that, that really tangible providing the fire, right? That goes back centuries. But then also I got to see him cry, right? And he was very tactile with me. I also got to see a really clear sense of mission, and how he provided financially for our family. He was a probation officer for people on A-class addictions in Bristol. He worked with people that were in this terrible cycle of prison and addiction. And still, now I'm learning about that sort of social purpose, that purpose bigger than himself, and the importance of that being an element of life, of living through purpose. So he gave me a great blueprint. I think he was fundamental to my understanding of how to be a man. And then my granddad actually as well. So actually probably for about a year before starting Men's Circle, I was chatting to my granddad almost every week, and still have continued to. So we've done it for about 5 years. We both choose a subject. We take it in turns to choose a subject, and we'd get to dive in. And he's 95, traditional doctor, very Christian, and of the generation that grew up in the war and wartime. And I learned a huge amount through him. Again, like how being a man has changed massively. The biggest one being that, like, I'm present with my daughter 50-50 with my partner. For him, he was out of the house most of the time, and my granny was there doing all the child rearing.
You mentioned multi-generation a couple of times in that, and I really love spending time with older people as well. How important do you think that sort of generational pass down for men is?
I think it's kind of fundamental, because if we don't have any roots in something historic, then we're sort of just making it up as we go along. And you must have talked to enough people by now to know that usually the fundamental wound or piece of work or psychological scar that most men hold is a lack of male role models from an absent father in the home, either completely absent or emotionally absent. And even my dad, he was there as much as he could be, but by default with work, 9 till 5, that was a 30-minute plus drive away. It was only weekends and holidays that I actually was present with him. And so I didn't have that role model in the house like women do, right? Women traditionally have the mum in the home. So that's a huge part of it, right? It's kind of the big part of it. And that's what I've seen happen with these multi-generational groups, is this beautiful peer mentoring. It's not to take all the advice and live the life that you see these older men living. It's to respect that they have lived and gone through hardship, and rather than the context or the political views or the particular values, it's actually just learning what it's like to live and go through hardship and overcome it in all of its colors and ways of dealing with it.
I love that. Pascal, why don't you explain Men's Circle to us?
Okay, so Men's Circle is a men's wellness club. At the core of it, we facilitate men's circles, and the majority of them are online. So they are peer mentoring spaces for self-development. We have a trained and supervised facilitator We have over 50 facilitators now that we are very proud of. They go through a really comprehensive training, and then they have ongoing supervision as they go. And there is a structure. There's a structure to the circle, which is usually about 90 minutes, sometimes up to 2 hours. And then there's a structure long term. And the majority of our circles will stay together as a group of 6 for anywhere between 3 months and sometimes up to 2 years. And it's all about getting to know each other, getting to know yourself in the circle, building trust, and then supporting and challenging each other in equal measure to be better men, better fathers, better brothers, better partners, better at work, whatever the aspect of health or the part of yourself that you're working on, you bring it to the circle, and the men support you in that. So some men arrive with a particular challenge. They might be going through a crisis. They might have lost someone. They might be struggling mentally. They might have lost their job, or maybe they've moved into a new area or a new country. Others are more on the kind of looking to master themselves. They want self-leadership. They want some self-direction. They don't necessarily want a coaching program that gives them all the steps and tells them what to do. I think a circle is about finding self-leadership. I mean, it's a phrase that you use with the podcast. I think you said at the beginning. So it's about having the kind of critical thinking to work out life for yourself rather than rely on someone to tell you how to do it.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for critical thinking. I think the what makes you a man question is all around that self-defining. It's what it is. It's who I am. I had an amazing guest really early on the podcast, Jindy Man, who said statement is there's 4 billion ways to be a man, and that really resonated with me, and I took it on into what I'm doing now as well, which is amazing. One thing I would like to ask around sort of the men's circle is why you think that particular format is good for men.
Well, we've touched on the self-direction piece. We do have some men that come and expect there to be steps ahead of them, and we have a structure, but really the invitation is to lead yourself in that space. So I think that's the first fundamental. I think men work really well in groups. I think in general, men find it less scary than a one-to-one interaction. And a piece of work that I hope to kind of fulfill in the next few years is showing evidence that actually this type of therapeutic space can be as effective as some of the one-to-one therapies that we see. And it still almost feels controversial to challenge CBT or psychotherapy, particularly knowing that loads of my peers, are in those seats. But I just have a feeling that we might be able to do it. And we're putting a study together next year with a Stanford researcher, Angelica, and we're hoping to provide some evidence that actually these circles are multifaceted, right? There's the wellness part. How much can it genuinely improve your well-being scores? There's various scales we use. But also, how does that impact the community? How many friends are you making from that group? How does it impact the people around you? So I'm excited to kind of start bringing some science to what we're doing, because, CBT, which is very popular and very well known, came into the mainstream because of the scientific evidence there was around it. And that's really my kind of short-term mission, is to popularize circles through their effectiveness. No, not just being an advocate and an evangelist, but actually like showing that there is evidence, and hundreds of people that show that this works.
The podcast that I started was originally called Shoot the Shit, the podcast designed to get men to talk. I then went on my own sort of personal development journey, which is obviously something that's a big part of men's circle in that sense, is like you're going on that journey and doing it. I then sort of came to my own statement that good mental health is a byproduct of doing. What's your thoughts on that statement?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that small incremental steps of action create more self-trust in our own ability to have willpower and change things, and compound to create a kind of positive mental attitude of basically self-esteem. Our esteem is based on our own um, trust in ourselves to fulfill what we want. And so kind of esteem is sort of slightly above self-care, and self-care is slightly above self-love, right? So if we can create small actions, and I speak for myself, right? Like when I notice that I am incrementally making steps towards something, then I feel a sense of control in life and willpower, and there is a kind of indicative satisfaction with that I'm actually in control and able to do things that I want. I'm really trying to bring it down to its basics, but I think that might be it.
Yeah, no, well, I agree with you. That's why I said the statement. So yeah, for sure. What are some of the things that you've heard before a circle that men think they're getting into? So like some of the things that they think it's about, and then what it is actually about. So what are some of the preconceptions that aren't true?
Yeah, I think the big preconception, or the big misconception of a men's circle is that it's going to be men crying and hugging and a pity party is kind of the phrase in the space. And some of them are, but I would say ours are not. So we lean into challenge, right? Challenge and feedback is a key part of how we lead ours. And I'm biased, obviously, but I believe men require that challenge from other men. I believe that's a kind of integral part of this fathering that we're doing with each other. The kind of cleaner cut boundaries and challenges that our dads might give us. And so we get the opportunity to do that for each other. There's the care, there's the softness, there's the support, but it's paired with this supportive challenge. Once there's trust built over a certain amount of time. So that's a key one. Another one is that it's going to be of, I think, another misconception of men's circles is that it's going to be very spiritual, very woo and hippie, because the majority of them up until really 5 years ago were, right. You'd only find them in festivals or very small Burning Man circles or events, and that was a key motivator for me to actually create our own organization, because I really didn't connect with that more spiritual language. I think there's a place for it. I consider myself very spiritual, and I can experience things spiritually in a different way. But I think the language we use, the branding, essentially, the marketing is really important, because the challenge to mainstream it is just getting people through the door, to just get people into the spaces that are good for them. And so, yeah, people are very pleasantly surprised when we are matter of fact, evidence based, non spiritual language. People talk about spirituality and religion, of course, and actually, fundamentally, I believe the work is it is a spiritual path, but the way we relate to each other is in plain language, which I think is just makes it accessible, makes it really easy to understand for the majority of people.
So sorry, go on.
Well, I was just thinking if there are any more preconceptions. I think there's a fear, right? One of the misconceptions is that the space is going to be really scary, and there's an anxiety in having to bear all, and then the reality of the experience is actually men find that they're put at ease, they're gently eased into vulnerability, and it's not like ripping the plaster off. And actually, we always say like everything's an invitation. Men are able to come to circles and not talk at all. They can just witness and watch. But 99 times out of 100, watching everyone else take part, and this comes back to your thing about why this for men, or why does it work? We follow suit, monkey see, monkey do. So once we've seen 5 or more other men share, chances are we will too.
So the story I was going to tell was of a friend of mine who, when I sort of first got into the space, we talked about like this doing idea of things, and I was like, "Oh, we'll go and play football again." And he was like, "I would love to play football. I miss playing football from school, but I've not played in 15 years, say. I can't get in the car to get to the football because they're already there. They've already been playing for, this is the story in their head, right? They've been playing for months together. They're not going to want someone else turning up and doing that. Is my understanding correct with the circles that they all start at the same time? How does that work?
Yeah, that's it. Majority of men will be new to the kind of format or practice. They'll come through a free trial and experience and decide whether it's for them. We've got a really high conversion rate, to use a kind of business term, but the amount of men that try it and then move on to actually being a member is around 50%, which is incredible. But it really just shows that the work speaks for itself, right? Having that space to be able to talk out loud without judgment, without someone trying to fix or solve it, is really unique in 2025. So then they go through that, and then they all join a circle together, the ones that sign up, and so they are beginning all fresh, new, majority of the time. Sometimes we'll put more experienced men who have maybe had a break and then come back into a more experienced circle. It just depends. But then we also run social trips, right? We do hiking trips, and I'm always like amazed and inspired by the men that do take this absolute leap of faith, because they're joining a bunch of strangers on a hiking trip for a weekend. They're sharing a bedroom with like in a dorm maybe, with people that they don't know before, and there's a leap of faith socially, for someone to decide to jump into this container for a weekend. But the feedback I get is that because they're all members of Men's Circle, there's an understanding, right, that okay, these men are of a certain type of man. They're ones that are willing to be vulnerable and share openly, and don't want to kind of, they want to skip the small talk and get to know each other. And I think that's the leveler, that's the point of connection.
That's a really interesting point. I guess my question to that is, what's before Men's Circle then? You talk about vulnerability and this ability to be vulnerable. So how do men get to there?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one we've thought about as a team, because we recognize that not everyone's ready to jump into something that might be confronting, that might require a higher level of vulnerability. We run some the social trips we run in London, or the hiking trips are an ease in. But I think maybe there are other in-person, more generic social events that could be like a way in. Conversation cards and meaningful questions have become quite popular. There's loads of them now where people are kind of using a deck of cards to facilitate some depth in a conversation. A circle and our community is an invitation to depth in yourself and depth into a community. For those that aren't there yet, maybe it's watching from the sidelines until you feel ready to jump in. Maybe it's watching a recorded circle that we're planning to do next year. Maybe it's choosing to go to a brand new social club, for an activity like a sport or something creative, and just stepping outside of the comfort zone of the social comfort zone. I think that's really common. we get a lot of men that are looking to step out of their shell socially. And I think it's still a kind of hangover of COVID, where a particular type of man, maybe a single man, really became quite socially isolated. And then that became their new baseline, their new default. And I'm still meeting these men that actually are looking to kind of break out of that pattern of choosing not to go out, to something outside of their social comfort zone, or their group of friends from school or university, or just by default locally. There's something around that social comfort zone, stepping out maybe first. Maybe that's the first step.
One thing that I've really found when I sort of entered this space and started to talk about this and mentioning mental health out loud, I guess, to sort of friends from school, it gave them a little bit of a base, a little bit of a space to open up as well. Have you found that yourself? How would you encourage men to maybe start mini circles, shall we say, with their friends from home?
Yeah, I mean, one of our principles is lead by example. I think in the mainstream media, mainstream charities, the slightly old rhetoric is like, men just need to talk more, and that's the message. It's okay to talk. You're allowed to talk. I think what I hope and what I hear about and what I do myself, with my peers, is just modeling the work that I'm doing in a circle. So choosing to share more vulnerably than I might have 5 years ago. And that sometimes is just with my family, right? Inviting a greater level of depth and vulnerability with some of my family members, and watching the difference in that particular conversation when I choose to take it to a certain depth. We talk about in our facilitator training, the lead by example principle is all about showing the men that they have permission to go there. Sometimes that might just be, in a first circle, a certain level of depth after a lot of time together and there's real established trust. It might be going to some of those more taboo, harder to talk about subjects, and again, leading by in that, sex, shame, porn, addiction, subjects where they might have no one or no opportunity to speak about, and that leading by example is how to approach it. You're not telling them they have to, but simply by going there, there's a permission given.
Yeah, this is really interesting, this sort of time building around vulnerability. And I think men, if you go like prehistoric almost, have this built-in mechanism not to be vulnerable, because it's like, who can I be vulnerable with? Is it the people that I hunt the woolly mammoth with? Like, it's still sort of built into our DNA. Like, even when you're around a group of friends, there's an element of bravado and things sort of being okay. It's still very rare for men to go deep, and also to go deep with the right people. You hear a lot around relationship breakdown because a partner's just unloaded everything that's been going on, and she's like, whoa, hang on a minute, like, I was not ready for that at all. Do you think that's the substitute that is Men's Circle? It's giving men that space to be super vulnerable.
I think it can be, yeah. But it doesn't have to be. I remember early on we talked about this idea of our partners by default becoming an emotional dustbin. And actually, the social scientist Angelica that we're working with has popularized a phrase called man keeping, which is very contentious and has gone viral around the world. And women kind of love it because I think or in general, because it encapsulates an experience they've been having. I think it triggers a lot of men because they feel like it doesn't represent their experience. So, Marmite, it's like love it or hate it, but what it clearly has touched on a zeitgeist, at least for some people, because of its popularity. And I think we recognized a similar thing where men were relying on their partners to emotionally dump, in a lighter sense, but really their romantic partner was the only person that they would speak about anything of depth, and that comes with a certain amount of kind of psychological energy that's required. So some of the feedback we get from men is that it does change their relationship in a really positive way, because they're no longer having to take these subjects to their partner. But of course, there are also subjects like the partner themselves that they can actually then bring to the circle. And a lot of our members say, I haven't, even after their first circle, I haven't spoken to other men like this ever. I wouldn't have these conversations. You guys know me now better than my close group of friends at home. So yeah, I think there's something in that. It invites a safety through our agreements, through the boundaries of the space, through it being relative strangers, and through the shared intention that we're going to get real with each other and authentic. And then it allows someone to be safe enough to go to those more unspoken subjects. And then there's inevitable understanding and not feeling alone with that comes with it.
One of the sort of other things that's thrown around is EQ, or emotional intelligence, that men lack it severely. Do they? And if so, what can they do to improve it?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I think in general, and I can speak for myself here, in general, men do lack emotional intelligence. I think it's well known, right? Women know it. And I think unless you've practiced a huge amount or been in a job or situation that requires really good emotional intelligence, then chances are you're probably not that emotionally intelligent. I think men that have sisters probably have a slightly better chance. But yeah, let's break it down. So emotional intelligence is emotional regulation. It's communicating emotion to other people, and it's also perceiving emotion. So let's start with emotional regulation. Really important. I think, again, it's well known that men are not great with their emotions. There's certain emotions that are permissible for men. Anger, to an extent, is talked about. But I think it's still shamed, and often comes out in ugly, destructive ways. Go to a football game and you'll see that. Sadness, grief, is really not something that kind of men have permission to feel from themselves, right? And again, if I try and bring this back to me, this was a real starting point of my journey. Like a year before I started Men's Circle, I cried for the first time in maybe like 5 or 6 years. A friend of mine facilitated a session where she allowed me to feel safe enough and held me, and allowed me to, first of all, feel anger, like just rage and rant. And then underneath that anger, there was real sadness and grief. I was going through a breakup at the time, and she could tell that there was all this stuff going on under the surface. And, she facilitates this type of work. So that, for me, kind of like opened the tap a little. And then I got more used to allowing that feeling to come up, and also began recognizing the other feelings that were being suppressed. So not just anger, not just sadness, but also joy. And joy is the kind of area of work that I'm leaning into now. Like, with a 2-year-old daughter, there's loads of play, but I still can catch myself, for some default reason, not allowing myself to feel full joy. And maybe it's about how I'm perceived. I don't want to be perceived as silly or stupid. So regulation, the way that I like to describe emotional regulation, right? Emotion, energy in motion. So I think, and this is my opinion at the minute, and I'm yet to do some kind of better research on this, that the reason we get this buildup of emotion is from a friction, right? Think GCSE science, a friction between our expectation versus the reality. So what's going on in our head versus what's going on externally. And this kind of matches up, right? Like, so we lose someone, we feel sadness and grief. We didn't expect to lose them, or we might, but we still didn't really want it to happen or imagine it happening. So there's a friction between those two things. Similarly to when someone misbehaves or disrespects us, again, there's a friction between the reality. We wanted them to be kind to us or nice, but actually the reality is different to what we expected. So then if we're not releasing that energy, that friction, naturally, and there are plenty of ways where we might do it naturally, right? We might regulate ourselves through shouting, right? That anger can create a swear word or something. Crying is well known, as a form of emotional regulation, or anxiety. Sometimes people are physically shaking with anxiety, right? Again, that's a mammalian stress response. That's great. That's our body doing its work. But if our default or our head as men in general is getting in the way of those natural responses, we're saying, oh, I can't cry here, or I'm not allowed to get angry in this situation, or I don't feel like I can control it because maybe there's loads built up, then it's, what's the word? Energy, right? Again, just coming back to physics over and over again, like potential energy in the body, held energy. And what we see over and over again is the release of this energy in maybe unexpected places or ways. I reference like a football game. I think football does an incredible job of regulating the majority of men. Like, I know there's tons of bad behavior that happen, during, after games. That's kind of why quite well documented. But actually what a game gives permission for is to get angry, is to feel sad, is to allow those emotions to come out on a regular basis. And I think that's what emotional regulation is about, is allowing those emotions to represent and come out in energy and kinetic energy, movement, heat energy. Sometimes we feel hot flushes, but also like a hot bath or a sauna, can release that energy. But then also like vocal, sound energy. So shouting, screaming, ranting, crying, but also talking, and allowing that emotion to come out. So yeah, this is the way I've found to describe it. It kind of, comes back to these energetics. Kinetic energy is, the kind of default that most of us know: exercise, going for a walk, and this shaking, right? We know that we do this before going on stage, but actually we can shake our whole body. This is the mammalian stress response, ecology degree. So watch a dog, they're shaking all the time. They're resetting their nervous system, and we can do the same.
I did do a circle with you, and the shaking was a part of that. And again, many misconceptions, many preconceptions, many ideas of what was going to be involved. Arguably the most woo-woo part of it, but in my opinion, the best part. I thoroughly enjoyed the shakedown. It was very good. So I will. That's got
Great.
Lewis approval.
Glad to hear that. So that's emotional regulation, right? So yes, men in general are not great at regulating their emotions, and we see the negative impacts of that. Whether that's addiction, whether that's prison rates, whether that's suicide at its worst. What's next? Perceiving, communicating emotion. So perceiving emotion, I don't think we're very good at reading people in general. I certainly didn't used to be, and I still think I still struggle sometimes to understand how someone's feeling, or managing to authentically empathize maybe sometimes. And so, yeah, that's about looking or feeling how someone else is feeling and adjusting our behavior to fit how we should be acting in a social construct kindly, right? And I think that's where I maybe teeter on the edge of the autistic spectrum sometimes. And I think quite a lot of men do share that experience. The amount of men that I meet that I think, yeah, you're probably somewhere on the spectrum there with me. And then the other part is communicating emotion. So yeah, how am I feeling? What's going on in my body? And the way that I've found most helpful, if I'm to kind of give away a tip or trick to the listeners, is to describe what's going on in my body rather than trying to put words to it. You know, I think words can sometimes hold us back into really describing a feeling. Can be helpful to understand it a little. There's something called the Wheel of Emotions that's worth looking into. Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, I think is a really good read around understanding emotions better. But sometimes in the moment when we are feeling the overwhelm of an emotion, it can be most clear to describe what's happening in the body. You know, if maybe I'm feeling anxious, actually what I might be describing in the body would be like, oh, there's a tightness in my chest, and my throat, and my hands are really tense, and there's a knot in my belly, you know. And I think that's really helpful because then the other person can relate to those descriptions of the body rather than the jumble of words that might come out, or worse, we're triggered and we're reacting and projecting. Um, so yeah, that's the last bit of emotional intelligence.
Amazing. One thing I really want to touch on really quickly is the Men's Mental Fitness Summit that you had recently just done. I want to know all about it, and I want to know what's next for it too.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, myself, Giles, and Pele co-created the world's. It sounds ridiculous when I put it like that. Well, the world's first men's mental fitness summit. We did this at Red Bull in London, and it was the first draft of bringing together the leaders, the advocates, the experts. In the space of men's health, of men's wellness, of men's mental fitness. And the intention is about mainstreaming and basically rebranding men's mental health, moving it away from what might be seen as more of a kind of victim mentality, from all of the kind of suicide statistics that we hear all the time if you're in the space, and away from the kind of crisis end, and really looking at the preventative solutions and the proactive nature of the pursuit of health and mental fitness. So this first event was an amazing way of bringing together loads of the people that I've met along the way the last 5 years, to connect a lot of them. I was making a lot of introductions in the room, and making sure the right people met the right people. And I think my main takeaway was a pride in the range of people we had in the room, the range of approaches to the same challenge. You know, on one end of the scale, we have the more kind of spiritual, feet on the earth, ritualistic men's work that is usually kind of in retreats, in person, in nature. Then we have kind of men's coaching, which is kind of like a modern rendition of men's work, very goal orientated, a little more commercially minded, kind of got a slightly more kind of individualistic methodology. Then we had lots of organizational leaders, influencers in the space, people that are speaking in the men's workspace. We had academics, mental health professionals, psychotherapists, policy advisors, you know, so really the other end of the kind of much more heady thinking, but also really integrated in the mainstream, you know, people that are directly influencing what happens to the majority of the country when it comes to men's mental health and all of the new policies that are coming out soon. So yeah, it feels like a really exciting place to be, to spark that beginning of a community of leaders, and start getting these silos to listen to each other. I think that's the key, because you know, I've when we planned the event, we talked about these three elements, and this is not like a new concept, right? This old concept of head, heart, hands, which is, you know, this idea that actually the balance between those three is needed for an organization or an individual to have balance in life. Hands, right, is the embodied part of this work, the more spiritual, the more ritualistic. Head is obviously this academic piece, the psychotherapists, the heady work. And then heart, is this piece around vulnerability, emotional intelligence, relating to each other and community. So just saw this come together in this event. I mean, what did you think?
It was, yeah, amazing to see. It's great to. I just love this space. The more that happens in it, the better, in my opinion. I think it's, yeah, you're right. It's great to connect people where physically possible, and try and grow in different ways. I think the reason that I started this was it's a resource for men now. There's a million ways to skin a cat, as they sort of say, and this is the idea: is how many people can I interview that have got a different solution to the problem that most men face. So yeah, I'm all for it. But on that sort of spectrum of everything that you sort of brought together, what in the men's space do you like right now, and what do you want to see more of?
It's men's communities. Like, I feel like these have taken off in the last year, particularly. I'm seeing more and more men starting their own men's communities. And I'm realizing that, having done it for 5 years specifically with men, but actually a further 10 years just in general building communities in different ways, I have something I can share. And I don't mean to kind of throw in a plug here, but at the beginning of next year, we are actually running a community blueprint training. So this will be the first time that we train individuals on how to either start or evolve their existing men's community. Because I'm recognizing, I was on a panel recently and realized actually I'm an expert at starting, building men's communities. Locally here in Sheffield, I've built something called Dad Club, which is, off the back of becoming a dad, wanting a social community, and at the heart of it, there is a dad circle. But yeah, just realizing that actually lots of other men are doing the same in different places, and kind of need some support in how to do that practically. Sometimes it's about the leap of taking it from just a side hustle to a full-time project, and having an element of money coming through. For others, they've just got an idea and they need the confidence to get started and meet their peers, around the world. For others, they're part of our community, and there are, elements of what we've started that I can hand over and go, yeah, go start a dad club where you are, go start a men's circle and where you are. So yeah, that's the most exciting for me. Just seeing these small communities popping off, some more established than others, and all got their own flavor, right? Revolving around the individual and their own need and desire for community. Whether it's fitness, whether it's walks and deeper chats, whether it's being a dad and wanting some time with like-minded individuals, coming down to that. So I shout about men's circles as a practice and as the thing that I'm evangelizing, but the other element is community, recognizing that the vast majority of men lack community, and it you can see it brings a smile on my face to even think about all the other communities that are kicking off. And I think that's my hope for the next 10 years, that I continue to inspire and help create more men's communities.
Pasco, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to find more, where's the next place for them to go?
So you can Google Men's Circle. You'll find our website. On most of the social platforms, I think we're at menscircle.club. On Instagram, I'm at being Pasco. You can find me on LinkedIn. Pasco Ashton. You'll find our stuff.